We are very pleased today to bring to the Voice Choice Joe Biden's 2022 Humanitarian Award recipient, Mr. Cylk Cozart. He joins us now here on the Voice Choice. And Cylk, we welcome you to the show.
Great to be here, Keith. Thank you.
Talk to me about, since this show is about voice, and we will get into the increments of your films in a moment, but talk to me about, as a little boy, the effect that Orson Welles had on you, your heart, and the voice.
Well, can you imagine laying in your bed as a 6-year-old and it's dark, but you hear a voice that's in the living room, this booming voice, but it's soothing at the same time, which was very odd. It was different, and it just mesmerized me. I was actually afraid to get up. I didn't want to think. I didn't want to disturb it. You know what I mean? And I just kept hearing this voice, and it did something to me. It spoke to me internally more than anything else. I think it was more about his voice being that texture that it was. But that's what it really did something to me at that point. It's a 6-year-old, and then I was drawn to it, and it was the radio that I was listening to. Now, I thought it was going to be TV, but it was a radio voice, and I couldn't help thinking about it. I kept thinking about it, and I would tell my mom, that voice, that guy, that man. You know, as I got older, of course, I knew it was Orson Welles, and I did my research. But that's how it started. I can't tell you specifically what all he was saying, but the voice it spoke to me, literally.
He spoke to all of us, and he still does. His
Yes.
influences, you know. But I would like to take you back to Miami Vice when you were filling in for Philip Michael Thomas on those loops. Talk about your first voice job.
Literally, it was my first voice job. I didn't want to tell the producers that I hadn't never done this before. I just knew I could do it. I just knew I could. And as you know, when you're looping someone else's voice, it's not just the voice. If someone's running, I just automatically simulated running just because it felt natural. And as I finished, now I think the first one was just a couple of lines, and then it was, maybe one word here, and one word there. And then so when I finished, the producer said to me, he said, you're the first actor that came in and looped and actually made us feel like you were there by running in place like you did, by being out of breath and all that. And I thought, oh, well, thank you. So that was my first job, but I learned a lot by just being in the studio with these wonderful technicians and producers.
So you began in Miami in modeling, and then you did some voice work. You went on to New York and then over to Los Angeles, which is where you built your ensemble of film work and television work. Talk now, if you will, about the transition 10 years ago of leaving Los Angeles and moving to East Tennessee.
Wow. Well, as one could imagine, the two are totally different. One is kind of serene, and all you see is rabbits and squirrels and deer. And the other one, all you see is cars, interstates, and movie stars. So that transition in itself was not shocking, because I've always, I visualized myself being in the arena that I'm in at this time. So as a model, I look at that as an actor, because you have to be believable. And if you're wearing shoes that you're showcasing, you don't just start running. There's a certain way you have to walk. If you're doing a hair ad, it's another way of modeling. And of course the clothes, which was the main thing, it was very difficult for me because I wasn't a typical shaped male model. Most male models, as you know, are 6'4", 6'3", about 130 pounds, 140.
And 40 regulars.
Right, 40 regular. If you didn't fit a 40 regular, it didn't matter. You wasn't going to work. For some reason, they let me in. I slid through those cracks, I think, because I was a 42 long, maybe something like that. But the pants were another thing. 32s were, you're 32. I was a 32 waist, but my thighs were muscular from playing basketball and kickboxing and all that. So some of the designers would say, oh, I love Cylk, but it does not fit the clothes, Don't ask me what accent that was, but it was a combination of a lot. So that transition from modeling to acting wasn't a huge transition. It was a very comfortable transition because I was used to the camera by that time. The camera just moved a lot when you're modeling. The cameraman, the photographers here and there and everywhere. But the acting was, it felt normal. It felt very real every time I was in front of the camera. So I would try to play a character when I was modeling. I would have a character in my mind as we were taking the photos. So it kind of worked. I didn't fit in really well because my mom's Cherokee, my dad's black and Seminole. So I didn't really look like anybody else, and so the white establishment didn't really know where to put me. They were kind of nervous of that the blacks would not accept me, and I learned this later after a few months in the business that they looked at it that way, and the black establishment didn't accept me that well because I didn't look like Kunta Kinte, and then back then it was either you're black or you're white. Mixed, it wasn't really in any form wasn't really seen that much until Vanessa Williams comes along.
This is a really good script I've got here that I'm looking at on Inherit the Land. We'll talk about the narration inside it in just a moment, but first, let's talk about Ball of Confusion, your affinity for basketball, and why you used your voice to narrate.
Well, first of all, Ball of Confusion came about as the history of basketball and its global impact on society. It's not just about basketball, but its impact that it's had on the cultures, different cultures, because you didn't have to even speak the language. But if you played basketball, it was a language within itself. So that was the main flux of the story. And I chose to narrate the film because the film parallels my life and my business partner, Keith Zimmerman's life, as we were growing up in the late 50s through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and all the way to present day. So Keith, being a Jewish man that grew up in Kansas City and around the Monarchs, and he would go home and listen to the Beatles at his house, in his fancy house. And then in the evenings, he would go down to where all the black musicians of the era, the beautiful sounds that was coming out of the Kansas City a lot. And he would be there with the baseball players like Satchel Paige and all those guys. They were like his uncles. So he would have a very diverse sounds were coming out everywhere for him as he was a child growing up. Myself, I was growing up in Tennessee, and I would hear country music. I liked it, but I didn't feel it as much as I did the R&B and jazz. And as I was coming up during the 60s is when they had the busing. So I went through things like the KKK hung my dog, my German Shepherd named King. His name was King. And from that point on, that was in the late 60s, going into the 70s, then the music helped me get through those tough times as a child. And again, the voice of many entertainers from a musical point of view really helped shape my attitude. So I decided to narrate it because it was telling my story as well, not the whole story, but as we were growing up. And Keith and I, we became closer and closer as friends and as brothers through the music, through the stories, and through the wonderful people we decided to put in the film. And I wanted to interview as many people as I could along those lines of all walks of life, females, males, didn't matter. And that's why I chose to narrate it, because I'm a part of it, you know.
All right, well, then, Cylk, let's take a listen now to your narration, a clip from Ball of Confusion.
They got it from him, no matter whether they want to admit it or not. But they did get it from Dr. Naismith, because Dr. Naismith gave it to Fogg Allen.
Fogg Allen was Dr. Naismith's best friend in Kansas. There's a famous photograph of Naismith that Naismith signs to Fogg Allen, to the father of basketball coaching from the father of basketball. In 1936, it was Allen who put together a campaign to raise funds to send Naismith to Germany to see basketball's debut.
So the film Inherit the Land, where did you find this script?
Jim Johnson is my friend and brother and business associate, is a great filmmaker himself. One of his family members was in a place called Marvin, North Carolina, which I had never heard of, and I think was married to someone that said, "Oh, there's a book called Inherit the Land. It's about this area here in North Carolina." And Jim read the book, called me, and he said, "This is a story that's never been told. It should be told, and I think you're the one to direct it." And I read the book by Gene Stowe. It's an absolute amazing book about these two ladies that happened to be white that lived during the Jim Crow era, which is basically, 1850s through the 1950s. So basically a 100-year time span that we're telling the story. And these two ladies didn't have children for whatever reason, and they were sisters, and they were the wealthiest people in that area. Basically, the banks borrowed money from them. So that helps sometimes when you have a certain amount of wealth. But at that time, black people were not allowed to own land. Black people were not allowed to go in stores that other people could go on a daily basis. And the government decided to use a new system where they would have certain white families adopt or bring in a black child into their home and raise that child to see if that would be a difference between white children and black children. That was actually that actually happened. And this family, these two ladies, brought a young child, a 4-year-old black child, in and raised him. As he got older, he had a daughter, and they both lived on the property, which was a no-no. Usually black people, especially during slavery, had their own quarters out in the woods or in an outhouse somewhere. They certainly would not be allowed in the home. But these ladies treated this man and his daughter like family. And when it came time for, when they got older, they left their land to the young lady. And of course, 100 of her relatives stormed the courthouse. And this was in 1921 is when the trial happened. So the story takes place around that trial. And we go back into the time when the child came in until till her death. And then how Marvin, North Carolina is right now. It's in a little county, Monroe County. So.
Okay, so let's take a listen to your narration now in the yet-to-be-released film documentary, Inherit the Land.
In North Carolina, there's a village called Marvin, not far from Charlotte.
I grew up here not knowing there was anybody named Jim Crow. When my relatives died, the white people put on their suits and came over to our house. I thought black and white people helped each other.
Jim Crow never made it to Marvin. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed that black children and white children in the South would join hands as sisters and brothers. He didn't know that had been happening in Marvin since the end of the 19th century. Folks here in this little corner of Union County, North Carolina, have been friends across the color line since Reconstruction. An oasis of freedom and justice. They still are.
We just think everybody's basically the same, and we just never had any problems as far as integration or not. They respect me and I respect them, and that's just the way it's always been.
So you're a singer.
I
Right.
sing. I sing. I didn't want to tell people I'm a singer because, you know, they've seen so many of the movies and they think, oh, here's another actor trying to sing. So I didn't tell anybody. I didn't want anybody to, you know, make judgments before they could actually hear something, and then they could make their judgments. But I wrote and created the theme, or the title song, Inherit the Land. I actually heard a voice, and I kept going to the piano and I'm not some great musician or anything. I play the drums. I bang on the piano a little bit, but I know when I hear something, I know what I want. So I went to some wonderful musicians that I know here in Tennessee, and I said, I'm hearing something. Can we play around with this? And here's what it came out to be. Inherit the Land theme song, basically, the title song.
Well, let's listen to it. This is the theme song of Inherit the Land, and this is Cylk Cozart.
There's a village in North Carolina called Inherit the land. Oh, inherit the land. I'm talking about Marvin in North Carolina. Inherit the land, my friend. When you're blessed now, you can inherit the land.
The first note sounds like a musical instrument. That's your voice, right?
Yes. It's
How did you do that?
being a descendant of the Cherokee people. I've done a lot of research over the years, and there is a sound, a specific sound that came just before the Trail of Tears, where the Cherokees were forced to move to Oklahoma. Well, there was some Native American Cherokees that didn't move, and those were some tough people, warriors, and they would go up on the mountain, and the main leader of that day would make a sound, and it goes something like this. So with that sound, it came out when I was really thinking if I could transport myself back to the early 1800s or the late 1800s, going into the early 1900s, what that might have sounded like. And this is what came out of my voice. It just came out. And then I've let several other Cherokee people listen to that, and they started crying. So evidently it's a tone, or it's a sound that resonates. And people often that hear the song, because I do bookend this, I start the song with that and I end it with that note. It was a cry to say, we're not going anywhere. They're not going to take all of our land. They're not going to kill all of us. That was what that meant. That was to let the people that were there, that didn't leave, because there was a lot of old people that couldn't move. People were sick. Babies were born. They couldn't leave on the trail. So that's what it signifies.
It signifies a lot. It really gets through when you hear it. We'll take a break right now, Cylk, and go to our sponsor, The Voice Shop in New York City. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Cylk Cozart.
The Voice Shop is a proud sponsor of the Voice Choice Vodcast, where you get to see and hear the inspirational talent behind the microphone. Shift your voice into high gear with professional training and coaching at The Voice Shop. You can save $20 off any purchase with promo code CHOICE at checkout. Visit us at voiceshopcoaching.com.
So I suppose that we're talking about the voice and accomplishment. How did you get this award, this really rare award from President Joe Biden as a humanitarian? How did that happen?
I think a series of events has happened over my life that led up to this. There's a few people in the Senate that on both sides that I've met over the years, and Tim Burcham, Congressman Tim Burcham, has been a friend of mine since we were probably teenagers. And when he went into politics, I went into sports, and then in the entertainment business, and we kept in touch. I've raised, I've been a part of, and have raised funds for a lot of organizations that, like Tourette syndrome, the Boys and Girls Club of America. Over the years, I love raising awareness. If you can't raise the money, you raise awareness, and that will raise the money, right? So of different organizations that, because if you have a voice, I think you should use that voice in a positive way. And that's what I wanted to do. So each movie that I make, or each movie that I have any type of control over, I like to go into neighborhoods where people don't necessarily want to go. And I'm with my foundation, Keeping Dreams Alive, is such a 501c3 foundation that does that. We go into communities where kids are not even going to school, and I go in and we talk to them and teach them about, how to study. No one taught me how to study. They said, memorize that and take a test, and you're like, oh, well, you get to college and it's like, no, it's a little more to it than that. So I didn't want any kids to grow up without that kind of information. So President Biden and Vice President Harris had found out through a series of people in my life that I had been doing these things since I was a kid. I was a volunteer fireman when I was like 13 years old, 14. And after that, seeing people that did not die in a fire and that I had something to do with their survival just made me feel that I can help people. You don't have to know someone to help them.
That's a cool philosophy. That's cool.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Voice Choice, Cylk. I am sure we'll hear more about Inherit the Land, Ball of Confusion, and some other things involving your voice in due time. But we thank you so much for joining us today. It is my distinct pleasure, and we will be listening. See you later.
See you, Keith. Thank you.
You're welcome.